Hello and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Show. My name's Lorne Risley and I'm going to be your host for this episode. I reviewed a game previously called Summer Sports Games. A title that felt way too bad to recommend to anybody, and then I saw the price and went, that's a joke, right? That's a joke. That's not real. That's real. That's real. Okay. Don't buy that game. Unfortunately, the internet gods intervened and the video wasn't captured, so I had to condense a half an hour's worth of ranting about everything I hated about the game into a 5-minute excerpt, basically saying, I wouldn't buy it if I were you. Lo, what God giveth and taketh away, he giveth again. On this episode, we're going to be looking at a game that, in many ways, does what summer sports games should have done. But in so far as having a negative comparison goes, yes, it benefits, but it still doesn't escape some inadequacies that I want to highlight. This game is called Sportmatchen, and I have to keep looking down at it because there's something about that name that just doesn't, I can't register it and memorize it. Sportmatchen, and matchen is all, Sportmatchen is all one word. I don't know if that's German. I don't know if it's a word used in other languages, or if there's a colloquialism in English that means the same thing, or if that's supposed to be an amalgamation of sports match men or something along those lines, which doesn't make sense because there's women in the game. When the game title confuses me, we're not off to a great start. But before we get too down to the game, let's consult the all-important notes, shall we? So, Sportmatchen is a fun and fantastical retro party sports game for up to 4 players. The genre is action indie sports. The developer is Forell video game brand. The publisher is DANGEN Entertainment. The release date was the 24th of May 2018. Currently sitting on Steam, and this is why the comparison to summer sports games is relevant, is $11.39. Now, just a bit more about the game itself. Enjoy a fine selection of sports disciplines ranging from the frantic and fast-paced to the relaxed and playful. What? Which ones are relaxed and playful? I guess we'll find out in a minute, won't we? Invite your friends, foes and a family to a game of fun competitive sports. The features include a collection of 10 highly varied and fantastical sports, team up in 2 or 2 tournaments, or let each sporter fend for themselves. Upload your scores to the online leaderboards and gloat together with others around the world. Set up your own tournaments by selecting the sports in the order that you want. A host of cute animals are waiting to help you out, whether it's fetching balls, being thrown, or being fed delicious candy. Tak Fuji is extreme. Okay. And that's about that for the description. What the hell is that? What do I think of this game? Well, I must admit, I do have a somewhat fondness for these types of games. To take you back to when I was in school, again, when we were playing on things like Miniclip and Newgrounds and other websites of that variation. Mini sports games, specifically athletics games, were all the rage. There were a dime a dozen, there were millions of them. The best of the best always had very similar characteristics in the sense that their mechanics were sharp and responsive. The focus was always on momentum. Even if you were messing up, you always still felt like you were still gaining traction. Sprinting one, for instance, was the one that always took me back because it was just back and forth. And even if you screwed it up, it wasn't a question that you would ever stop or trip over, it's just you would go slower. And more to the point, they kept the graphics simple, so the emphasis was on the simplicity of the gameplay and how complex you could come up with strategies in order to manipulate the relatively simplistic mechanics. To the point where you'd be competing against people in ever elaborate scenarios where some people would be using 2 fingers like this, or a combination, or they'd have a friend sitting on one side tapping as quickly. Weird combinations of gameplay styles. And that made it fun because the ultimate end goal was simple to understand and ultimately easy to attain. And I think that this game strives to be a little bit more innovative than its competitors, but in doing so, I think in some of these games, they've forgotten the core element, and some of them aren't fun, to be honest with you. So, I feel like it's going to be easier to go by them game by game just to save a bit of time, because there's going to be some that I'm going to want to fixate on, some that I'm not. So let's get the hard ones out of the way first, shall we? So, the 100-meter dash, the simplest of the simple. Left and right, tap as quickly as you can, to move forward. Easy, right? This game has a trip mechanic. Now, don't mind that. Don't mind that in the slightest. That's actually kind of an interesting concept. The fact that a sprinter could be running so fast that he somehow forgets all of his 4.5 years worth of training to not cross his legs while he's running in the most important tournament of his life. Totally believable. Sarcasm aside, I actually welcome the fact that it's got a somewhat interesting gameplay mechanic whereby if you're too frivolous or if you're out of time, you can trip up. Here's the problem. That first rule of every single good one of these games, the controls just don't feel sharp enough. There's a number of instances, not just limited to the 100-meter dash, where I felt that no matter what I did, if I went as fast as I could, I'd trip up all the time. If I didn't go as fast as I could, I'd get annihilated by the other competitors. So that leads me to one of two conclusions. Either I'm somehow up pushing left and right in sequence increasingly quickly by, I don't know, using a giant inflatable mallet to press the buttons that I wasn't vaguely aware of, or the mechanics just aren't tight enough with the controls to be able to allow you to get away with that frantic style of gameplay, which this is the first knock on this game compared to its somewhat older, more garish brother Summer Sports games. At least Summer Sports games got the frantic nature of the tapping right. That was the one thing that I could argue maybe it did okay, whereas this game, not only is it difficult to gauge what kind of momentum you're up to because it doesn't have a gauge in this particular game, again, because you can't see how quickly it's moving or what sequence that you're supposed to be pressing, when you trip up, it's almost like, I don't know what I did there. I don't know what I did. And because again, there's no tutorial in this game, there's no practice mode in this game, and a big feature that we'll talk about in just a second is in this game that really annoys me. You lose, and there's no restart. So you've already lost your first game, and if you put this in your first, and you can choose up to 5 in certain scenarios, or you can play through all 10, boom, you've already lost one. Let's move on, shall we? Ball toss. Simple enough premise, take a ball, throw it. Person who gets closest to the wall, or in the last round, puts it in the bucket, gets the most points. It bounces back, you can double your points, but then obviously the further back, the less it's going to be. And you control the angulation of the throw, you control the power of the throw, and you control the wind of the throw. This one I liked. This one was okay, because it worked. It's kind of hard to screw this one up, because when all you have to worry about is the elevation, and the wind, and the power, it's kind of it. I mean, the only interesting thing is the strategy, whether or not you want to lob it as hard as you can, nice and low against the wall, and hope that the momentum carries it through, but then the friction of the ground stops the ball, or whether or not you want to throw it nice and high and hope that the angle carries it and it just bounces high and lands. It's interesting. And of course, adding that caveat at the end of having to try and get it into the bucket, cool. It works just fine, this game. And then we move on to hoops. I've got a pretty big problem with this game too. So hoops is just basketball, simply put. When you have 4 characters on screen, it devolves, and it devolves badly. The mechanics are simple enough to understand. Movement, jump, shoot, and push. Now, the push mechanic is where this game really loses it for me for one simple reason. If you push and miss, you fall over. If you're pushed, you fall over. If you push them, they fall over. And it just devolves into what effectively amounts to a wrestling match with, at points, someone realizing, hey, wait a minute, we're supposed to be playing basically basketball here, aren't we? And just dunking on everyone else. And when you jump high, you can actually bounce on other people Mario style. So there's potentially scenarios where the computer on this game can unbelievably f your shit up. And I'm sorry to future me, because I'm gonna have to edit the swears into this, because there's no other way of phrasing it. It f***s your shit up. The fluid, somewhat agile nature of basketball is completely lost with this game. There's no dribbling ability. There's no way of being able to get past your opponents without them pushing you. Put it this way, if you're facing them and they're coming towards you, you can jump and shoot. But that's your only recourse for being able to get past them. And that means that if you're ever, like me, inexperienced and unable to get any practice at the game, because of course this is your first time playing it, the computer's gonna push you over, take the ball, And the computer will score the three-pointer every single time. And here's the worst part of this game, and that's pretty bad. The worst part is that most basketball games have some kind of aiming reticule to help you, be it angulation. Where's the ball going to go height-wise? It won't tell you where it's definitely going to go, it's just going to give you an idea of what the angle's going to be. And then you work out the power from there. Or it tells you on the power meter where the sweet spot is, and the computer automatically dunks it for you, but it's still your job to get it in between the desired point, shall we say. This game, neither one of those. And judging the distance and judging the height, judging the power, judging the pace, all while worrying about one of these three pushing you over. It's an education in what it must be like to govern a 5-year-old's basketball game where you just give them a ball and say, put the ball in the net. And it just devolves into a mess of hurt feelings and scraped knees. The only thing I do like about this game is that it's segmented, so it feels more like a proper game rather than just a quick arcade-style mini-game. That it feels, at least because it's got 90-second intervals and a little jig in the middle by a couple of otters and a cheerleader. That's, you know, it's a nice touch. It feels more like an actual game. So I have to give the game credit for that because it feels more fleshed out than some of the other games in this list. Candy Throw, it was okay. Literally, you're standing in a spot and you throw candy. You can control the power, you can control the distance. The animals fly by and you just throw it in. And you get multipliers for how powerful the throw is and what kind of animal you throw it in. Simple, inoffensive, easy, works, cool. When we come to Hot Ball, another one of these that I imagine, again, that I think the developer thought was intriguing or interesting, but it's just weighed down by its mechanics. The idea is that you're on a bouncy ball, you've got to make it past a number of obstacles, including sand pits and jumps. But the momentum is lost in this game again. There's no way of really building up any serious momentum. You can bounce higher and higher, but again, this one just isn't fun when you've already got the sprint. It just feels like a bit of a wasted point. I don't know, this one is probably one of my least favorite in terms of not just frustration levels, but just doesn't seem all that worth it, to be honest. It feels like a pick for the sake of having a pick. And then you've got River Dodge. River Dodge works easily enough, very simple. There's 4 of you in 4 different lanes with 3 channels. And you have to work your way up the river. The further you go, and obviously try to go further than the other athletes, the more chance you've got to win, and it'll present you with obstacles. It'll also present you with collectibles that I think speed you up as you go. So, and it's responsive, it's quick. This is probably one of the few games that I can't criticize for the quickness and the mechanics. It was responsive when I wanted it to move, and whenever I screwed up, it was genuinely my fault. So, not the most enjoyable mini game in the world. I felt that it wasn't easy to follow because it's dead on and there's no sort of perspective. It feels a little off and it feels like everything's coming at you a bit too quickly, but ultimately it didn't feel too cheap or too tacked on. So again, cool. Oh, actually I've just realized I've made a mistake. No, animal feed was what I described earlier, where you throw in the things into those. Caddy throw. Sorry, I misspelled it. I don't think English is the developer's first language. No, but anyway, caddy throw is basically the hammer throw thing, trunch pull. You've seen Matilda, right? Kind of like that. Albeit you're hurling a small animal with a parachute. Pretty sure Peter's going to have something to say about that. And the idea is you've got to tap it again left and right to build momentum. I struggle with this game for no other reason than this does not suit a keyboard pad. It's not left and right, it's directions. So imagine if you've got a controller, that's easy enough, right? You just rotate it. It's a bit like an old school fighting game. You've got to get the combination. You don't press the buttons individually, you roll your finger in a certain motion. You try doing that on a keyboard. It's not possible. So this game is rendered incredibly difficult because you have to, again, coming back to when I was in school, you've got to position your fingers in such a way that you can get them in a sequence, build up momentum, and then you've then got to aim and then throw and then decide when to deploy the parachute. Now, I will argue that this game could have been very fun because of the added element of the parachute adding greater distance and the direction. It's spoiled though on PC because of the control issue. It's just not playable. You need a controller for this particular minigame, so know that going into this one. Then we come to the wall climb. Again, I imagine the developer was thinking that they were being innovative here because it's not just, you don't just climb the wall, you don't just press the directions and press maybe A to jump or whatever. You have to press the button that corresponds with the ledge above and then press jump and then dictate where the direction is. This game feels needlessly complicated and needlessly convoluted because of that mechanic. Again, it's just not all that fun. It's well produced. I can't say that it's there's save points, and if you make it up certain parts of the climb, it saves so that you don't have to start all the way again. But again, because the computer has the natural advantage of not screwing up like you will, I don't recommend this game either. And then we've got the 250 meter sprint. Again, it's basically hurdles. Same problem with the 100 meter sprint, quite frankly, so there's no point in staying on this one. The only minigame in this entire series that I would actually recommend to people is this, the pillow push. And all it really is again, coming back to Miniclip and Newgrounds, in fact, I think this game still exists, is the old school sort of martial arts game where all you could do is press forwards, backwards, up and down, and it would dictate what your stance is. You press the spacebar to attack. This game functions on much the same way. You can press a hit button, a counter button, and a taunt button, and then move around forwards and backwards to the ring. And the idea is you've got to knock your opponent out of the ring. Unfortunately, you can break this game quite quickly by just countering. Exactly the opposite problem of hoops, which is that the push is too hard to manipulate because the penalty for pushing is you falling over and missing, which sucks. Who pushes and falls over every single time? Doesn't make any sense. In this game, there's no penalty whatsoever for just constantly countering. Now, of course, you can't win by just countering if the other person just sits there and counters, but the chances are the CPU is going to take a swing at you at some point, which means that as soon as you hit that first counter, you move closer, ding, hit them out of the ring. I'd be surprised if you don't win every single one of your games on this particular minigame because it's so easy to manipulate. But now you've heard all the minigames, let's talk about the game in general. What did I like? The presentation's really sweet. The 8-bit, 16-bit mechanics, the looks of it all, very colourful, very bright, vibrant. I like the old school soundtrack, the ready, steady, go, on your marks, get set, go, but it's all digitized, so that sounds really, really cool. The soundtrack's really nice. I can't say that it doesn't have a really interesting, diverse soundtrack for each level, and for the menu screens, and the sound effects are really, really good. But here's the other big problem with this game. I don't want to have to sit through everything all the time. What point does a skip button become too much to ask for? The points in some of the games where if you're playing against the computer, for instance, and you have to take turns, they take way too long. And some of these games are individual games that the computer will have a go, you will then have a go. Then 3 other computers will have a go. And there's no way of skipping. There's no way of getting to your turn. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, this game is about moi. Now, if you want to apply this to the multiplayer aspect, absolutely fine. Of course, everyone's going to have their turn. Makes sense. They can't all go at the same time, even if they're not playing on the same PC, and there's got to be a way of you all being able to compete simultaneously and the score being loaded up at the end. I've got to think that's possible. I can understand that. Here though, why do I have to wait for everyone else to finish? Why can't I press the skip button? It will take you hours upon hours if you allow the computer, and like I did, which is just click exit and then pick the mini games that I can play quickly and then play the games that are going to take forever to compete against the CPUs on my own, so I don't have to sit and wait through all of these. It's a design oversight that ruins a lot of this game because you're not going to sit through a lot of this. So how would I summarize this game? Because I don't want to rag on it too much. Now you've seen each individual game. You've seen how the game looks and feels. It's a reasonably quality product. The trouble is, it makes the mistake that I'm seeing that a lot of games make, which is that in the midst of trying to be somewhat innovative or trying to put their own fresh spin on a well-worn concept, they ignore what makes the best versions of that well-worn concept work, which in this case is an emphasis on achievement, an emphasis on tight controls that work and reward the player when they nail it and get it right, rather than punishing them for every little mistake that they make. You've got to make sure the incentive is as good as the stick. You've got to have the stick and the carrot. You can't just have the stick constantly and punish players for constantly messing up with no tutorial and no practice mode or no prompts to tell you where exactly you're making these mistakes. This game is a victim of trying to be too innovative within the mini games. Obviously, it's nothing mind-blowing in terms of a concept. It's a mini game. You get these on the Wii, you get these on the VR, all of them. I get that. But the 16-bit, it looks lovely and it's well produced. There's no bugs or glitches that I could come across. And it's that price point as well that I have to take into consideration. It's miles more expensive than a lot of the games that I'm reviewing at the moment. And I can't for the life of me figure out why I would ever recommend a game with so many inherent faults with its design, not with its implementation or execution, but that it just isn't fun. And for $11.39, really? No, this is not the game that I'm going to recommend to anyone if they're looking for a sporting mini game experience. It's just too frustrating. Even with multiple players, I imagine they're all just going to be quitting and going, do you know what, dude, screw this game. I don't want to play this anymore. So I would not recommend it. However, if you are looking at this and summer sports games, there's no comparison. It's less than half the price, much better produced. Some of the games are fun. It doesn't break, and it looks pretty cool compared to the weird long arms, short legs thing. But what do you think? Are you a fan of these kind of sports mini-game type games where they amalgamate them all together? Are you a big fan of that 4-player party-style competitive element that some games like to implement? I'm not personally. I prefer a more immersive individual experience, but I'm not adverse to a nice bit of competition, so long as I have a reasonable chance to win. And some of these games really don't afford you that opportunity. But what do you think? Summer Sportmatchen. I haven't been able to reach the developer on this one, so I apologise. I've not got any real insights into this game for you as opposed to normal. Apologies for that. But what do you think? Leave me your thoughts in the description below. But that's been this edition of the Halcyon Show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're liking, subscribing, sharing, and liking some more. I hope you're also checking out some of the content creators in the description below. I hope you're following me on Twitter and checking me out on Defunct Games. I'm wrapping this up because, god damn, this review's taken it out of me. It really has. I will just share with you one story. Trying to get the thing to work initially was hard because the buttons aren't mapped to where you think they're going to be mapped to when you first boot it up. I had to uninstall and reinstall the game to get it to work before I figured out, wait a minute, where's it? There's the button. That's how poorly designed it is when it comes to its overall production value. So just know that going in if you are going to pick this game up. But I wouldn't recommend that you do. In the meantime though, please check out some of the content that I've been producing recently. I'd appreciate if you will. I'll be producing, like I said, at least 2 videos a week going forward, so I hope you're tuning in for those. Follow me on Twitter, @LaurenRisley, hurling abuse, probably at these guys over there, or taking it from them for, you give her crap. Well, I have to call it how I see it, no matter how kind you are, so I apologise in advance. Thank you very much once again for watching. I've been your host, Lauren Risley. I hope you're definitely taking care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Halcyon Show.